Welcome and good morning or good evening or whenever you're watching this program. This is the Lawrence County Oral History Project, and I'm your host, Norm Taylor. It seemed like it's been a while since I've been on and been able to do a new program. I know you've been watching me on reruns. People say that they refer to me now as the Andy Griffith of the Channel 14 because I've been on reruns so much. So I guess I've lived long enough and I've had enough programs now that I am on reruns. But this one is going to be a new program for you, and I'm glad that you're joining us today. I want to go back to a story, and I want to make sure I got my guest in before he retired because he's retiring, and I want to make sure that we talked about this specific story that we're going to talk to you about today because I think this is one that, of course, this program is about preserving histories. It's about preserving people's lives and their stories, and I think that everybody that's ever been on my program that their story needs to be preserved. And everyone I meet, their story needs to be preserved. We need to remember these stories. And this is one that I feel like that is important remembering. I want to give you a little bit of background about the story that we want to talk about today. And before I introduce my guest to you, 1956, 5 American missionaries to Ecuador were brutally murdered, speared to death by a Stone Age tribe. The name of the tribe, I may be mispronouncing this, but the Waorani, is that close?
Waorani.
Waorani tribe. That while they had been exchanging gifts to this particular tribe, and for some time, suddenly the 5 men were speared multiple times and even hacked to death with machetes. If I was going to end the story there, or if the story ended there, I guess probably I wouldn't even be talking about this story today. But the fact that just 2 years later, the wife and sister of 2 of the murdered missionaries walked back into the jungles, walked back to the tribe of the very tribe that killed their beloved ones, made this story unique. It is a tragic story, but a beautiful story in not only murder, but forgiveness and love. And it's certainly good to be able to talk about a story with somewhat happy ending. My guest today, Denise Whittaker. Dennis, I've known Dennis for a long time, and Dennis has been an educator in the North Lawrence Community Schools for
a long time.
For a long time, for several years, and has been an excellent teacher for us, and one that we're going to miss. But Dennis, you are aware of this story. Mm-hmm. Now, I know yes. You were young, but you'd agree with me that this is one of those stories that need to be remembered and told.
Yeah, it's not really my story, but by the way, should I tell you, you do not look like Andy Griffith.
I don't look like Barney Fife, do I? No, I don't look like Andy Griffith. But I have been in reruns now for a while. But he's been in reruns longer.
No, it's not my story, but yeah, I do agree it's a story that needs to be remembered. And I just happened to be down there. I was 8 years old at the time.
Now, this is in Ecuador, right?
This is in Ecuador.
Mm-hmm. And how come you were in Ecuador?
Well, my parents were missionaries, like these 5 other missionaries. They were missionaries with a radio station called HCJB. So we lived in the capital city of Quito. And my folks had gone down in 52. And these other 5 missionaries actually were down in the jungle. They were with different mission groups. So I was down there because my folks were also missionaries.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long had they been down there in Ecuador?
My folks?
Yeah.
Oh, we went down in 1952. Mm-hmm. Not too long, a couple years after they graduated from college. In fact, my folks had gone to the same college that at least 4 of these other missionaries had gone to, Wheaton College in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So they had gone down about the same time.
Okay.
So,
in 1952, how old were you?
52, I was between 4 and 5 years old.
Okay.
So
now, obviously, you're very young. That you're there, and how long were you in Ecuador, you yourself?
I was there till 66. So from the time I went,
years.
So before I started school till I graduated from high school.
Okay.
See, all of us missionary kids, once we graduated from high school, we came back to the States to go to college.
Okay.
So I was pretty much there in my childhood.
Yeah.
That I remember.
You have some warm remembrances of the place?
Of Ecuador?
Ecuador?
Yeah, a lot. How long you want to talk?
Oh, I wish we had time to talk about that, but it's a very special place to you.
Well, everyone says that, but in reality, that's all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if someone say, "Is Bedford special to you?" You grew up here, right?
Yeah, it's.
Just what you're used to. So to me, it's what I knew.
Yeah.
So now I look back on it. Yeah, very unique. I mean, very, very thankful I was able to grow up in a foreign country, learn Spanish. Beautiful, beautiful country. But like I said, we lived on the north side of the capital city. We're just about 10 miles south of the equator, 9,000 feet up in the air. So even though it's on the equator, a lot of people say, boy, it must have been hot. No, it was actually quite cold. Year-round, the temperatures were in the 60s. But we got used to it. We'd walk around in shirt sleeves. And
Yeah.
I took my wife down years later and about froze to death. Forgot how cold it was. But snow-capped mountains around in the distance.
Well, when you went to the States, were you born in Ecuador then?
No. I was born. I'm an American.
You're American.
I would have been. My folks were.
No, I said then you went to.
Right, so I was born in the United States.
But you wouldn't remember anything much about living in the United States. You really, like I say, your growing up years.
My dad was in broadcasting school in Washington D.C. just before it went down, and I have a vague memory of sitting on his shoulders for Eisenhower's inauguration.
Is that right?
So that would have been, or something right around there.
That would have been
53, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would have been in.
So maybe it's 53 we got down there.
Okay. Yeah, that would have been 53 for an inauguration. Okay.
Yeah. So no, I don't remember a whole lot.
Yeah. Do you remember being on his shoulders for that?
I finally asked Dad years later. I said, "Dad, were we there?" He said, "Yeah."
Yeah. Wow.
So because we never talked about it, so I do. So I guess I did.
That would have been a great.
Now I don't remember a thing about Eisenhower,
Right.
the speech. I just have this memory of huge crowds of people standing outside.
When you came back to then the States in '66, then it was having to relearn in essence. Even though I know there would have been bits of this, your culture obviously raised with your mom and dad, but it would have been kind of relearning then a different culture again. Some adjustment there would have been in '66.
Of course, I went to a missionary school. We spoke English there. I did not go to Spanish school, although we lived with Spanish all around us. So I learned American textbooks. And I came back to the States for 4th grade and 9th grade. So I was in the States a little bit. Missionaries come home on furlough. Have to visit the people who support them in churches and stuff like that. So, but yeah, in a sense, you had to sort of get reacclimated from what you're used to. But I didn't see it particularly unique. It's like any place. If you move, your new community. For years, I guess people said I had a Spanish accent. But
Okay.
I think that's gone.
Yeah. I've never detected that. But you really don't have a Southern Indiana draw either.
Thankfully.
The story, and I borrowed, may I hold this up, Dennis?
Sure.
This is the DVD that I believe that Dennis loaned me, in fact. And my family and I sat down and watched it. And Beyond the Gates of Splendor is the name of this, and I'd highly recommend for anybody to watch this DVD. I watched it, and that's the reason why I'm doing the program today. There was a movie, I think, The Gates of Splendor. This one was like the second, Beyond the Gates of Splendor. And then there's a new one called At the End of the Spear, I believe. It was a couple of years ago when this was put out.
Yeah, the Gates of Splendor was a documentary made in which they pieced together what they knew a couple years after it happened. This one came out about 3 years ago, in which they brought the story up to the present time. It's a remarkable story. Yeah. And then also just a couple of years ago, they made a movie, The End of the Spear, which is not a documentary, so they took some liberties with the actual facts, but it's still very good movie.
Have you seen that one?
Yes.
Okay, I want to see that. Would you recommend that too, At the End of the Spear?
It's a good movie, because like anything else, when I know the real story, when I see it, I don't like the way they've changed it.
I understand that.
But actually, the person behind it was the son of one of the missionaries who got killed, so Steve had his hands on it.
And I have trouble with that as well. As if you, as you know, I study history quite fervently. But then whenever I see a movie that's made, and then I think, hey, well, that didn't happen. Yeah. They took some liberties with Hollywood. Took some liberties. So I assume the same things happened with this movie then.
Not with this. This is the documentary.
Not that one, but I mean with the new one. Yeah.
With the movie itself, yeah. But it's still very, very good. You get a feel for what happened.
Tell us about the story, Dennis.
Because I was 8 years old, so I was a kid. I did not know any of the missionaries except for one of them, and that was Nate Saint, the pilot. He was with Missionary Aviation Fellowship, and his job basically was to bring some people in and out of the jungle. Back then there were no roads into the deep jungle, and so the missionaries trying to reach very primitive tribes, sometimes like you say almost Stone Age, lived out. Can you imagine living out in the middle of nowhere? Well, not nowhere, in the rainforest, and your only access to outside is when that little plane comes in and brings supplies or takes you out.
They honestly did not have hardly any contact at all with the outside world.
Except by radio. Well, the missionaries with radio. But otherwise, the tribes in there were, no contact. There was one group of Indians that had not been contacted by anyone. People knew they were there. In fact, they were considered so vicious that the other Indians in the place called them vicious. They used the word Auca, which basically means savage. So the other Indians in the jungle called them savages. So the Aucas. In fact, for a long time, that's all anyone knew them as was the Aucas. And of course, missionaries have a passion, like anything else, that these people come to know who God is. Mm-hmm. And so Nate Saint and four of the other missionary men who were stationed in different places in the jungle had gotten together and said, when Nate Saint actually had flying over, actually found where the Auca Indians were, they started talking about how they could reach them. So the five of them had a plan to eventually land close. They found a sandbar on the river within a few miles of where this location was. And they began a plan to land there and to try to contact them. The first thing they did, though, for several months was to begin to fly over and drop things. Actually, he had a neat technique with these little Piper planes. If you go in a circle and let down a bucket, the bucket would sort of fall to the middle and be stationary. So the plane's flying around a circle up there, and the bucket's on the ground. So they would actually lower gifts down to these people.
Were you aware of what kind of gifts that they were actually given?
Ribbons, colorful stuff. I can't remember, combs, a little bit of that. And after the second or third time, the Indians began to return things like cooked monkey. And one time they actually even sent a live parrot back.
Okay. That's actually, it was neat. They started breaking ground there then that.
Right.
And they did this over a period of weeks, months, do you know?
Yeah, several months.
Okay.
Several weeks, several months.
Okay.
I don't know the exact time frame.
Yeah.
In fact, the interesting thing, if you read the book Gates of Splendor, there's a picture in there of the son of Nate Saint, Steve. And there's a parrot up there, and that parrot, this is after his dad's been killed. And so here's this little kid sitting there, and that parrot is the parrot that was given by the Indians to them. Yeah. So this is gradually trying to make contact. Obviously, there's no place you can land. There's no runways, and these people, when they did come out of the jungle, the shell oil was gradually penetrating the jungle looking for oil. And so these Indians had killed people looking for oil, and researching. So people knew about them, but no one really knew much about them, and they were feared. So this is going to be an attempt then. The starting of the story is the attempt of these five guys, very intelligent men, all college educated. These were not dumb men at all, but their passion that these people get to know who Jesus Christ is. Mm-hmm. And so they had this plan to try to reach them.
Yeah, from what I've read, Dennis, that the ones that had made contact, which was very sparingly, they just didn't come back. I mean, you were taking a big risk to make contact with these people.
Well, they didn't know.
Yeah.
So they actually had, when Nate Saint's the pilot, when Nate Saint actually found a little bit of sandbar that was about several hundred feet long, he felt he could land the plane. They actually set up a camp there on the beach. They actually also built a tree house just for protection. probably the most fascinating thing is, though, they had guns. Obviously, the Auca Indians do not have guns. They had stolen machetes and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But the men had decided that they would never use those guns on people, even for protection. And the answer is rather interesting. Think about whether you could do this. That we know God, they don't. So we're not. So they had decided, even though they had guns, they would not use them, even against if they were attacked.
So there was real moral and
Sure.
dilemma there.
Sure.
I can understand having the guns. I mean, you're in a very remote area just for protection against certain animals.
Sure.
So they did have guns. Yes.
Right. So after, you want me to keep going?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a good story.
Yeah, it is. After several days of waiting here on this sandbar, 3 Aucas came out, 2 women and a man came out of the jungle. I say jungle, rainforest is probably a better term. I mean, obviously it's dense, but rainforest. And of course, no one knew how to communicate with each other, but they looked at each other, talked to each other, jabbered and lack of language, tried to suggest to him, let him look at the plane. In fact, I actually took the man up in the plane and flew over his little village, which is really primarily just one big hut. And he was so excited he almost stepped out of the plane, but...
it was gutsy for him to even get in that plane.
It was a great start. And of course, they didn't come with any weapons. And
were you familiar with this plane, by the way?
Yeah, I probably flew in it. And that's my contact, really, is the year before my dad had gotten hepatitis. Very common in South America to get hepatitis. And he had it bad, and the doctor said, you need to just go somewhere and rest. Because missionaries don't rest very well. So one of the few vacations we went on, we actually took us down to the jungle, to Shelmetta, where Nate Saint was located. And we actually stayed in his house with Marge Saint, his wife, and his kids, who I grew up with, by the way, who went to school with Kathy Saint, Steve Saint. And Nate Saint took us out in a plane. Now, he had 2 planes, two yellow little Piper Cubs. And so I either flew in that one that he was in or the other one, I'm not sure. So I got to know Nate Saint because he took us out and flew us out over the rainforest, which was, I mean, from a kid's point of view, to go up in a little plane and fly out over the jungle. I mean, you talk about... Mm-hmm. And, of course, walk through the jungle there in Shelmetta. So I knew Nate Saint. In fact, one of my memories is we were eating dinner the night we were down there. And all of a sudden, he actually goes to the kitchen. I hear this loud stomping sound, and we all run in there, and a little snake had come in under the door, and so he was stomping it. It turned out to be a poisonous snake, but it didn't make us feel good about sleeping that night. But actually, he flew us out to a jungle station out in the, where there was no roads. We stayed there for a week in bamboo houses. Off the ground, it was all bamboo. And we rested there. Of course, Dad rested, and we just played in the river and walked through the jungle. I had just a ball. Yeah. And of course, a week later, Nate comes back and flies us back to Shelmetta, and then we drive back to Quito. Yeah. So I knew him. So obviously the next year, even as an 8-year-old, when all of a sudden I hear, and of course I knew his kids because they went to school with them, and then when I hear that Nate Saint is killed, because I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, aren't I? Obviously, even as a kid, that impacts me. This is the man I knew. This is the man I flew in his plane. Chances are I flew in that plane. That was... Yeah.
So, and that plane and that sandbar, I know, is going to play a big role here in just a few moments.
Yeah. So over the next couple days, as these people stayed or came and went, these 3, and then they eventually left. And the men had a clear sense that when they came back that something important was going to happen. They were really looking forward for breakthrough. So on the radio, Nate would fly out every day because he didn't want if rivers, it rained too much, rivers would flood. Obviously, the sandbar disappears, the plane's gone. So he would fly out in the afternoon. The other 4 men would stay there. He'd come back the next morning, bring in whatever supplies. But his wife, he didn't fly back to Shell. He flew back to a closer place. And so from that time on, the wives did not see their husbands again. Because on Sunday, it happened to be a Sunday, but basically 5 or 6 of the men came back with spears. I mean, these were people that they used 2 weapons. They had long blowguns that were 9, 10 feet long. I actually have a short one at home. I should have brought it because they're kind of interesting. That, of course, they made out of a very dark wood called chonta, very hard wood. And then spears, which were 9 and 10 feet long, which they hand carved. Took them a long time to do these. They used the blowguns to kill monkeys and small animals, and with the darts. But spears were for people. And so they came out, and although no one knows exactly what happened, basically all 5 of them were killed by these men who had come, the Aucas, who had come back and speared them. Nate Saint was speared in the side. His head was cut with a machete there. And so when the usual contact time came that afternoon, and Marge Saint is on the radio waiting for her husband to contact him, and he didn't contact, they knew something was up. And the next day they hadn't responded either.
At some time they had been exchanging gifts, and it seemed like it was going fairly well as far as that. But my understanding, the little bit I've read or remember, is that perhaps that there was a lie that was really told with one of the tribesmen, that evidently one of the men had been caught with a woman out in the rainforest there somewhere, which was against their tribal laws, and then somehow these 5 men were connected, or they thought they were connected. So this was really retribution against those men, right? Can you remember anything?
But they didn't know about that for years later. It was not until probably 30 years later that they found that story out, when Steve himself eventually ends up back with these people. Okay. And it was only then. Now Steve, because he was, some people say, why don't you just leave the Indians alone? Why do you mess with it? These were groups of people who did not understand forgiveness, did not understand that if someone kills you, you kill them. And the tribe was basically dwindling for several generations of killing each other off. It's...
the majority of the deaths I've read actually was homicide.
Homicide, yeah. Something like 60% of the deaths over 5 generations were homicide, which is remarkable. Yeah. So, excuse me, getting way ahead of the story again, but Steve eventually ends up back there years later. As a son of one of the men who's killed, obviously it's his job they know that. So he knows he never asked. You never ask, why did you kill my dad? Even though by this time he's friends with these people. But finally when they tell him, one of them one night said, let me tell you what happened. As it turns out that the 2 ladies, the younger lady and the young man, were, the young man wanted to marry her. The tribe was, we're not going to say tribe, we're talking about a very small group, maybe 20 people. Was not real happy with that. They were all mad about this. So the 2 had taken off into the forest. The older lady, though, she doesn't look that old, because people not too many made it to old age, followed as sort of the chaperone. And so those were the 3. As time went on, eventually, going back, they got in a big argument. And the older lady had stayed. So the 2 went into the forest back to the tribe by themselves. The older lady stayed on the beach with the men. Well, when other men found them by themselves and said, what's going on, they had to make up a lie. They simply said, the missionaries were out to get them and kill them. Awesome. And so then, of course, obviously, the men of the tribe get inside, well, let's go kill the missionaries. So it was a lie. So the relationship had been good, you're right. And so they planned it, got together, Sunday afternoon went out, destroyed the plane, essentially, because the plane is canvas covered, and killed all 5 of the men.
The men were back just at their encampment then,
right.
So they were just probably milling around, and it would have taken them all by surprise.
Right. Well, when they heard them coming, of course, they're excited because there was nothing whatsoever to believe that anything bad was going to happen until these men come out with spears. I assume we don't know what happened. I assume they charged them.
Do you think that they and this is just conjecture, I don't know if Steve could have been able to answer this question, but that they had access to the guns. Could they have fired upon them?
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, once again, some of the stuff we didn't know till years later. I think it was Roger Udarian had actually run across the river. The river's fairly shallow. There's very swift rivers, but it had been across. And and he had a pistol in his hand. And one of the Indians came charging across him, one of the Aucas, the Waorani, we now know they're called the Waorani, came toward him with his spear. Now, these spears are big black things. They're vicious-looking things. And Roger, from what this is this man later telling about how he speared him. Roger did fire into the air over his head, but basically the Indian ran across and ran him through. So he did have a gun in hand, could have shot him dead if he wanted to. Mm-hmm. Which is one reason why, of course, eventually the impact is going to have, because the question is, why did this man not kill me? When I had a chance to.
Right.
It's the beginning of understanding of forgiveness, understanding that that there's a God who loves you, and it's not all about killing each other off.
Yeah. What a moment in a moment when you know your life is endangered, and you had the ability there.
Now the question is, could you have done that?
Yeah,
as a Christian, could you have done that?
It raises a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
It starts going through your mind. And this would be a great discussion area on this one. I mean,
a
group discussion. If hopefully you folks that are watching this out there, you think, wow, this would be a great youth discussion group or on this very topic. Right now, what we're discussing about, if he had the gun in his hand, he could have defended himself.
It's really sit around Sunday school class and talk about it, but really, if I'd been as a Christian, could I have done the same thing? Boy, I don't know.
And that's a great one. That's a great
story.
Because he did have the.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a powerful statement there, and then but we don't know. We know that this one man. We don't know if the others really had access to it, or obviously they'd made a decision somewhere along the lines not to use it for that. And after this occurred, then they left the men there. When were the men actually discovered themselves, the bodies?
Okay. Well, eventually, within a few days, I mean, the word was out. Even made to the United States. Life magazine sends down representatives, and helicopters flows in. And another missionary, Frank Drown, who I went to school with his son again, led a party into the jungle to try to find them. When they got there, finally, several days later, they obviously found the men dead. Some of them had floated downriver, so it took a while to find them. A helicopter that had gotten there that morning had actually found one of them, Ed McCully, and had taken his wristwatch, but then left him. His body disappeared. He's of the five, he was never found. They eventually found the other ones. Nate was there.
Was Nate found there at the site?
He was found down the river a little bit.
He was found down the river, okay.
And Frank said he knew he was supposed to tie a rope around him and drag him back to the beach. He said, I couldn't do it, so someone else had to do it, because these were his friends, because he was a missionary out in the jungle too. Yeah. And so basically, I know we're going to run out of time here, make a long story short, eventually the men were found. They were buried there, except Ed McCully, who they never found his body, but through his watch they knew that was his. Mm-hmm. His wife was able to identify him. So. Yeah. Eventually, once again, we better probably move on ahead, but eventually there was one of the Auca girls who feared for her life a couple years earlier had actually had risked her life to go out among the Quechua Indians. And through that connection with Rachel Saint, Nate Saint's sister, who was a Bible translator, had begun to try to understand the language. And then after this, once again, several other Aucas several years later had come out, ladies. And through that, connections back and forth, and the Aucas, now we know they're Waorani, invited Rachel Saint and Elizabeth Elliot, whose husband had been killed, Jim Elliot, had been killed, were invited to go live with the Indians, the Waorani, and they agreed to. And Elizabeth had a little girl who was about 2 or 3 years old.
Which again, a great discussion area. Would you be able to do that?
They did. Remarkable ladies.
Yeah.
And they did. They walked through the jungle into the Waorani camp.
Because you're going back into, I mean, what would be running through your mind that if it happened to them, couldn't it happen to us? Couldn't it happen to my children?
Yeah. Probably, of course, being women was going to make a huge difference, obviously, there. They were well accepted. They built houses for them. Of course, the houses were not much. And of course, in terms of privacy and stuff like that. Yeah. But for the next couple of years, they were there. And then Rachel stayed on. Elizabeth Elliot eventually came back and came to the States, became quite a writer, very famous lady in many circles. But Rachel Saint stays down there and eventually learns the language, translates it. And the interesting story is most of those Indians became very, very good Christians.
Yes.
And began to basically understanding forgiveness. That really, and in murders, the killing stopped, just like that. I mean, from wiping each other. In fact, one of them later said, had you not come, we would have been gone by now. We would have disappeared from killing each other all off.
Amazing.
Yeah.
They started bringing this tribe. In fact, I know some of them, and we do know that they became friends, like you say, a little bit later on. Actually, Steve, where you mentioned, became a friend of the actual man that he later revealed to him that he was the one that actually did kill his dad. So later on, they became friends. They brought them in, and I have somewhere along when I've read about this, it was kind of amusing to hear when they were bringing them into our society, some of the stories, even just going to a grocery store, and
of course, now you're jumping up into the 1990s.
Yeah, I know.
And 200s, but yeah, eventually.
There's so much to the story I wish we had time to get into.
Well, maybe if anyone wants, we can get back together and talk about the in-between stuff.
We may have to do another show on this because I feel like there's too many loose ends. But
well, Steve is still active with this group of people because obviously as the roads penetrate more, just like the United States 100, 150 years ago, the Indians, as civilization penetrates, what do you do with them? They're in that same predicament now. And of course, Steve is trying to help them out. This is Nate Saint's son. They killed his dad. Eventually becomes best friends, really, with one of the men who kills his dad. Yeah. And Minkai, who eventually brings him to the United States. And of course, can you imagine living in the rainforest now all of a sudden? And so stories of they just got huge amounts of food that they just give to you.
Yeah.
And Steve said, Steve's trying to explain, well, it's not that simple. You
give them these little papers, and then they give you all this food.
It shows them a credit card,
yeah.
and Minkai, of course, he said, no. He said, you give them that, but they give the card right back to you. So, so I was trying to understand the modern world.
Yeah. If you were putting yourself in the position of these people to come in to see these, the highways, the large cities, it would have been just a lot to absorb and to take back. I would have just would have enjoyed when he came back to his people just to say, you won't believe this. You won't believe this, but
well, his wife thought he was too fat. I mean, obviously eating all this American bad food, fat. And so he has to explain why he's fat. Well, they have so much food.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of happening between this story and what happened back then. So it's a marvelous story of redemption. It really is.
It really is. It comes to my mind, Dennis, and you're right. We only have just a few minutes to go, and just so many things are coming to my mind. I'd like to carry this on, Norman. But again, it brings up some good discussion points. What would you have, if you had been in a position, you had the opportunity, would you have taken their life? And that is one of the questions. Would you have had the strength like these women had to go back to the people that actually murdered your husband, the kid's dad?
Take your 3-year-old little daughter with you.
And take them back into that jungle. That would be a great discussion area. And again, even you mentioned, why not leave them alone? Just let them live. So other people would say, we don't need to be there.
Right.
That, we don't need to bring. And so, but again, from a Christian perspective, so that's interesting.
Well, just probably their perspective is they're saying they're glad you came.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But Valerie, that little girl, is now, of course, an adult, and. Of course, there's an interesting thing she tells on this, where when she came to the States, of course, because they were all naked, she ran around naked a lot of the times too. Yeah. And she said when her mom brought her back to the States, she just didn't understand why all the kids had clothes on.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Dennis, we have just a couple more minutes, but how did this affect you personally? How did
well, obviously, as an 8-year-old, you don't respond the way an adult would. But I would have to say, I think all of us have defining moments in our lives. 9/11 certainly is a defining moment in the life of America. As a kid, this was a defining moment because when the idea that here is a person that I knew, I didn't know the other four, who was killed, and when the stories come out, and of course I knew his daughter is my age, go to school together, that her dad just got killed, the man I knew, the man I flew in the plane with. And of course, as my folks being missionaries, their job is to try to get people to understand who God is. Obviously, was a very significant thing in my life that there were people willing to do whatever they thought was right to make sure that people heard. And then of course, but to me more important is following the story that's happened since then. We've left out about 30 years in here.
Yeah.
But as things have evolved, it's true, Marla, that God's hand is truly upon a lot of things in ways that we don't know.
And I want to say to the people that are watching this, because I know the people are going, hey, well, boy, you're doing a teaser, because this is there's too much of this story. If you guys contact me out there, you see me, I know you see me at Walmart on the streets, or email me, or get in touch with me, and you say, hey, listen, we want to know more of this story. You let me know, and Dennis, you'll come back, won't you, and where we can fill in more on this story.
I'm here.
Okay, and so you let me know, and we'll do some more of this story. I want to say that these men that died on that sandbar in 1956, they have been responsible because of this action, because of the actions of their wives so far, that have influenced thousands since then. Yeah. We'll never know how many has been influenced by the story of these men. And let me say that, Dennis, in wrapping up, I've known you as a man of integrity, of honor, and as a good teacher, good man. Well, I've always thought of you in that way.
Thanks.
And so you have influenced the lives of many children. Your wife, which is also retiring, Kay, I want to mention her as well, has also given years of service to the children and to this community. Mm-hmm. And we've been very fortunate to have you. Just in a moment there, please tell me then, what's your plans now?
Well, we got 3 months. Between now and retirement, I got 3 months. That is a lot to do. So I'm keeping plenty busy.
Yeah. And
after that, I'm just going to play it by ear. I do hope this year I get back to Ecuador.
I was wondering.
I have a brother-in-law who goes down and works with an orphanage. I hope I can go down with him. Yeah. And I need to get back. I haven't been back for 17 years.
I hope you get to go back.
So I need to go back. But other than that,
may I borrow that again?
Going to enjoy retirement.
Folks, this is one that I can recommend to you. I'm not for sure about the industry. I haven't seen that one, so I can't do that. Dennis has seen it. It doesn't quite follow, but if you want to know more of this story, Beyond the Gates of Splendor, this documentary, it is excellent. Please go and rent it, go and buy it. It'll be well worth your time. Sit around with your kids and watch this program, and even take a few minutes to discuss some of these things that we've been talking about. You want to hear more about this? We'll do another show. I want to say thank you to my very special guest, Denise Whittaker, which is, we've been discussing Beyond the Gates of Splendor, the missionary lives, and the tremendous story of hatred, murder, but of redemption and forgiveness. This has been the Lawrence County Oral History Project. I'm your host, Norm Taylor. Thank you for watching.